Vladimir Putin has been given the message by the British government that he can get away with murder.
Thank you, Michael Cohen.
You still have like 10 seconds left. You don't want to add anything?
I might even say something like, "Stop the poop!"
After President Trump cut short his summit in Hanoi, North Korea held a rare press conference, disputing his account that talks failed because they wanted all sanctions lifted. The foreign minister says that if the U.S. had only lifted some sanctions, they would have dismantled their main nuclear testing site.
우리의 이러한 원칙적 입장에는 추호도 변함이 없을 것이고 앞으로 미국 측이 협상을 다시 재개하는 경우에도 우리 방안에는 변함이 없을 것입니다.
Utility giant Pacific Gas and Electric admitted today that its equipment is probably responsible for starting the Camp Fire, the largest wildfire in California history. Firefighters say a transmission line that malfunctioned was likely the ignition point. Federal filings show PG&E knew 5 years ago that the line was too close to the ground, but the company says this was not a problem with the specific tower under investigation. More pedestrians were killed by cars in the U.S. last year, according to new estimates, than in any year since 2009, when those accidents hit an all-time low. The report blamed the deadly combination of SUVs and smartphones. Israel's Attorney General says that he plans to indict Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and charge him with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. The announcement caps a long investigation and comes 40 days before an election. Netanyahu denied all allegations.
הם מבצעים נגדנו רדיפה פוליטית, מסע ציד חסר תקדים,
Michael Cohen was back on Capitol Hill today, trashing his old boss, President Trump, for the third straight day. And while Cohen was behind closed doors, briefing the House Intelligence Committee, it was the first full day of CPAC.
Fake news.
The conservative conclave that, these days, is basically a 3.5-day Trump campaign event. CPAC attendees gathered to escape the D.C. media bubble. And escape they did. In the morning sessions, they got a CPAC-ized version of Cohen's testimony.
Michael Cohen said, "No, sir, I have no evidence of Russian collusion with the president." Thank you, Michael Cohen.
If you would rather listen to Michael Cohen spew lies than applaud the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, you do not mean well. I'm so sick and tired of saying that the Democrat Party and liberals mean well. They do not mean well.
There was a time that Trump's shadiness and corruption were not welcome at CPAC. In 2016, attendees threatened to walk out if Trump showed up here. So Trump bailed. But a lot has changed in 3 years. Now, CPAC is Trump country, USA. MAGA hats are everywhere. And some of the biggest names in the Trumpiverse are just standing around, ready to defend the president into any microphone that comes along. What do you think of the Cohen testimony yesterday?
It was interesting. I've had the opportunity to speak with the president many, many times, and what he said about the president's character does not reflect what I have observed about the president's character.
Well, he's known the president longer than you, though. Hasn't he?
Yeah,
10
probably.
years?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, people keep saying that. I'm just interested in that because people keep saying, "I know him."
Yeah, but he
knew him for 10 years.
Yeah, but he has a financial and political incentive to say what he said. I have no incentive to say, what I'm telling you.
CPAC is mostly an event for young conservatives. Jacqueline Fowler just moved to D.C. from Manhattan and is looking for a job in conservative politics. But when it comes to Cohen, she already sounds like a veteran Republican operative.
He's done a lot of shady stuff. He's lied to Congress before. So it makes no sense to me that you would have someone who's a known liar and put them on a pedestal in front of America, knowing that they're inclined to lie. And you're kind of just like putting seeds in people's heads, whether it may or may not be truthful.
But even here, there are signs the continuing drumbeat of bad news about Trump is taking its toll. This Cohen testimony yesterday, did you watch it? Did you read about it?
Yeah, I read about it.
What'd you think?
Obviously some pretty damning stuff, but...
Really?
Yeah, but nothing, Nothing we didn't already know, but I think, making the headlines, it's just obviously not going to help the president in any real way.
But you guys don't seem like full MAGA guys. Is that true, or are you?
Listen, I used to be. I mean, I've met Donald Trump. I've had a conversation with Donald Trump. I used to be all in on him.
What changed?
I just, it gets old after a while. This whole Twitter thing, he sounds like a fool. In terms of policies, I like some of the stuff he's doing, but he derails his own agenda.
So who are you with now?
Well, I mean, I'll still vote for Trump. I'm not sold completely on the man himself.
Yeah. Trump fatigue at CPAC. That's the breaking news of the day, I gotta tell you that.
Yeah, it's reality.
Paul Manafort's Russia connections, Facebook trade secrets, weaknesses in the UK's nuclear submarine system, all pieces of highly sensitive information that the world only found out about because of a simple mistake. Someone failed to properly redact a document. Redaction is the editing or censoring of information prior to its public release. Before paper went digital, redactors used black markers, whiteout, or scissors to get the job done. But word processors and PDF readers have made it a lot easier for redaction fails to happen.
Redacting is hard because what you see on the screen isn't the same thing in the computer file. So it's easy to look at a screen, black out face or some text, and believe that you've blacked it out in the file. But it turns out someone who's a little more skilled can look at the file. They can often see what has been blacked out. And when there are failures of redaction, that's the failure. The person doing the redacting doesn't really understand how the program works and makes that visual mistake.
Take Manafort's lawyers. They apparently didn't grasp that even if you black out a passage in a PDF, the underlying text isn't permanently hidden unless you do something called merging the layers. They didn't merge the layers in a court filing, and ended up publicly revealing that Manafort had met with a suspected Russian intelligence asset. The revelations about Manafort just made him look bad, but redaction errors can have more serious consequences. Samsung and its lawyers were fined $2 million after poor redaction led to the publication of details of a patent licensing agreement between Apple and Nokia. Players for the U.S. women's soccer team had their personal information, including their home addresses, leaked in a court filing. Worst of all, Australian federal police accidentally revealed the personal details of an assault victim to the alleged perpetrator.
It is not a sufficient defense to just point at a paralegal or a secretary or support staff and go, I didn't read that, I didn't do it, it was their fault. When we as lawyers sign on to a document, we are signifying that we know the content and we're responsible for it. And failure to do so can subject you to sanctions by the court. And those penalties can be monetary or they can be penalties against your client. So it's a serious thing.
One recent study suggested that PACER, the online database of federal court records, likely contains tens of thousands of poorly redacted documents. And PACER exemplifies the perils of redaction in the digital age. It's easier for redactors to mess up, and the consequences of doing so are much greater, since digital documents spread further and faster than paper documents ever could. Maybe it's time to break out the black markers.
It's been almost a year since defected Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned by a nerve agent in Salisbury, England. Work to decontaminate the town and investigate the attack is still taking place. The British government says that 2 Russian military intelligence officers carried out the attack using the chemical weapon Novichok. The 2 men claim they were tourists.
Друзья нам давно уже советовали посетить прекрасный город.
Salisbury.
Да.
Прекрасный город.
The Skripal case led to sanctions on Russia and worldwide condemnation.
It was highly likely that Russia was responsible for this reckless and despicable act.
It's a very sad situation. It certainly looks like the Russians were behind it.
The attack reiterated one of Putin's main messages. Russia doesn't forget its enemies. When news first broke of Sergei Skripal, what did you think?
I said to myself, oh no, another Russian hit on British soil.
And why did you immediately come to that conclusion?
Because this is what the Russians do. The guy was declared a traitor. Putin has publicly said that they go around and liquidate traitors. And all of a sudden, the guy has fallen ill from poison. It's kind of obvious.
Bill Browder knows a thing or two about life in the Kremlin's lens. The American-born hedge fund manager moved to Russia to make his fortune in the 1990s, buying up cheap, formerly state-owned assets of the Soviet Union. He was openly critical of how oligarchs drained money from corporations, and his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, uncovered a bigger scandal, accusing Russian tax officials of swindling hundreds of millions of dollars from Browder's firm. After Magnitsky went public, the Russian government accused him of being involved. He was detained, beaten, and denied treatment. He died behind bars at the age of 37.
This is Butyrka prison where they kept Sergei. This was a story that I wrote just around the time of the third anniversary of his murder. We have the most well-documented human rights abuse.
In the name of his murdered friend, Browder lobbied Congress to pass the Magnitsky Act, which gives government the power to freeze the assets of people it sees as human rights offenders and ban them from entering the US. At least 65 people have been sanctioned under the act, including some members of the Russian government. Putin's taken it pretty personally.
They have threatened to kill me. They have threatened to kidnap me. They've made many attempts to have me arrested. But it's like they say that a war is many days of boredom punctuated by a few moments of absolute fear.
Putin's opponents have been poisoned with laced tea, shot down just before they planned to protest, and found in suspicious circumstances, having apparently committed suicide. Russia has quite inventive ways of killing its enemies, doesn't it?
It does, and there are certain things you just can't protect yourself against.
Do you have somebody tasting your food?
So I don't have a food taster and I don't have a door opener. So, if they want to put Novichok on my door, they could do that and they would succeed. The main security that I have is I'm not hiding. I'm in plain sight. I'm very high profile. And if something happens to me, everyone will know exactly who did it. He's a mafia boss and he terrorizes people, he compromises people, and he gets under people's skin. And so he needs to create a devastating set of consequences for disloyalty. And then there's probably politicians who are personally scared that if they do something tough on Russia, then maybe they'll be Novichoked.
They don't think. There's no politician here who thinks that they're going to get Novichoked by Vladimir Putin.
That is just not true. I've actually had conversations over the years with politicians who believed that they were personally at risk if they did something tough on Russia.
But why?
What I think is going on here is that Russia has completely infiltrated the political establishment and polluted it with dirty money.
You said that Putin's the richest man in the world. What evidence do you have?
First of all, Putin doesn't keep the money in his own name. Putin keeps the money in the name of trusted oligarchs. And so you can't point to one bank account with $200 billion and say, there's Vladimir Putin's bank account.
And so how much do you think he's worth?
Putin, I believe, has 50% interest in all the oligarchs' wealth. And if you were to aggregate the oligarchs' wealth, it's $400 billion. So I think Putin's worth $200 billion.
Since Skripal's poisoning, the Trump administration has put new sanctions on Russia, specifically targeting two men accused of carrying out the attack. But Browder thinks the UK hasn't done enough.
So the only consequence to Russia using military-grade chemical weapons in Salisbury to assassinate their enemies is 23 diplomats being expelled. The 23 spots that have been made vacant are now being refilled. Effectively, Vladimir Putin has been given the message by the British government that he can get away with murder.
Every week, ferries unload about 1,500 Venezuelans onto this dock in Cedros. That's much heavier traffic than the tiny port is accustomed to, all because it happens to be just 7 miles from the Venezuelan coast. Of the 3.4 million people who've left Venezuela since it descended into crisis, Trinidad and Tobago has proportionally received the most, about 60,000, or more than 4% of the island country's population. But Trinidad has not given them any kind of legal status. Adults are not allowed to work, and children do not have the right to a public education. So they live underground, and many Trinidadians have taken it upon themselves to help.
Say hi.
Kelly Langdon Pascal runs a small school for children with special needs.
A friend of mine came to me and he said, look, I have a group of Venezuelans and they have 5 children and the children are not in school. They can't get them into any school. I said, okay, that's fine. I'm going to register them, make sure that they're in school every day. I'm not going to be charging any fee.
So we're going to do healthy food and unhealthy food, right? Healthy. Good, healthy.
Kelly enrolled 2 Venezuelan girls. Though they didn't speak a word of English and their teachers didn't know Spanish, they've learned to manage. Now Kelly is thinking of enrolling another 8.
In my lifetime, I have never seen this amount of people coming into the country, hoping to make a new life or at least to try to stay above board and to be able to help their families back home.
Kelly also rents her basement apartment for cheap to one of the girls' parents. The Campos are a working-class family that used to support the Venezuelan government, until it became nearly impossible to make ends meet.
Entonces, para ustedes, por ejemplo, cuando sí logran conseguir trabajo limpiando una casa o en una obra de construcción,
hay que estar escondido.
¿Ustedes cómo se sienten con eso, tener que vivir así escondidos?
Es fuerte. Es fuerte porque tienes que vivir como asustado. Estás trabajando y estás pendiente que si viene la inmigración, viene la policía.
Pero aún así, a pesar de ser inestable, mejor estar acá que en Venezuela.
Por supuesto, totalmente.
Por ejemplo, yo voy y limpio una casa hoy y a veces pagan 150 tití. Con esos 150 tití podemos comprar para desayunar, almorzar y cenar.
Con el salario mínimo que gana el venezolano, no te alcanza ni siquiera para el desayuno.
Trinidad and Tobago may be taking in the highest proportion of Venezuelans, but it's done the least to manage them, and it's been the most tight-lipped about the crisis next door. Many Trinidadians think they know the reason. The government of Nicolás Maduro has direct leverage over their country in the form of 150 daily cubic tons of heavily subsidized natural gas. Shankar Tilaksing is an elected official in Cedros.
How would you characterize the central government's response to this situation?
Very, very poor. I have lobbied through various local NGOs to the Ministry of National Security, to the Ministry of the Attorney General Office, and even to the extent of the Prime Minister Office, to have international agencies come and set up their base camp to lend humanitarian aid to the Venezuelans, so it will be a faster process. And all they concern about is the gas deal.
The government of Trinidad and Tobago declined our request for interviews. The Minister of National Security said this week that his cabinet is considering an amnesty program that would give Venezuelans the right to work for a year. But considering is not the same as taking concrete steps. And the government continues to leave the task of caring for the Venezuelans to a single nonprofit, which helps them apply for refugee status from the United Nations.
We seek an asylum for the first time.
That status isn't worth much to police who find a Venezuelan working illegally. Some 440 Venezuelans are now detained in Trinidad and Tobago, many of them for months. In January, one recorded this appeal to the outside world.
Allí tuve un mes de calabozo en calabozo, durmiendo en el suelo en una condición infrahumana. No es posible que las personas de Inmigración Trinidad agarren una persona venezolana con su carnet de ACNUR, con su documento de ACNUR y le rompan los papeles en su cara y le digan, esto acá no sirve, esto no vale de nada.
Still, all of that hasn't been enough to deter Venezuelans weighing the crisis at home against a 3-hour boat ride to the Trinidadian shore. Sometimes the only way out they can afford.
Let's come out and look over here and see if we smell anything this far. Calling the United States Border Patrol, let them know we're getting close to the border. Good morning, Major Craig. This is Baron Partlow from Stop the Poop. I have a crew from HBO Fox Vice with me. We're going down into Goat Canyon. I'm just advising you that we're getting close to the border. We're just documenting. We're not trying to shoot any border security or border personnel. You smelling it now? Come over here.
Baron Partlow's a very specific kind of environmental activist. He documents the wastewater that flows into the United States from Mexico.
It might already be too late for me, but I still try to exercise caution. Safety first, that's us every time at Stop the Poop.
He doesn't have a background in science or journalism. What he does have is a lot of free time. And someone who follows him around with an iPhone.
There's no birds here. There's no lizards. And only the most resilient of rodents are running through here. Rats, rabbits, maybe an occasional squirrel. When you hear Stop the Poop, it's like, you know what? Stop all the bullshit. Stop the trash.
Is it meant to be literal or is it meant to be figurative like that?
It's meant to be literal. Stop the shit coming from Mexico.
While the federal government obsesses over the so-called emergency at the border, a small town is trying to get people to care about a crisis that has nothing to do with migrants. The Tijuana River flows north from Mexico to Imperial Beach, and it regularly brings trash, chemicals, and poop along for the ride. The problem's gotten so bad, the beach is almost never open.
I mean, it's brutal. Right now, we're looking at, good surf, and it's filthy water.
There aren't actual turds floating around, but there's plenty of liquefied waste in these waters. It's a pretty gross reminder that Mexico's problems are the US's problems too. What does it smell like when it's bad?
Pesticides and detergent and poop.
Like poop.
Nothing but sewer from Tijuana.
People take this shit seriously here, and they meet all the time to talk about it.
When you've got hundreds of millions of gallons of sewage and poop and chemicals, including lead, DDT, toluene, benzene, this is a public health crisis.
Can't a lifeguard just call you and say, I think it smells, and you'll close the beach?
If you smell something, let us know. Let the lifeguard. The beach is everything here. It's a working class town. We don't have a lot of money, and it's killing us that we have to be begging, literally, for federal officials and both sides of the border to actually do something to help us.
When you hear people talk about a border wall and the amount of money that they want to spend on a border wall, is it hard to sit here in Imperial Beach?
Yeah, it makes me sick because we don't need a wall. Well, $5.7 billion, are you kidding? We could fix every problem along the borders.
Before the Tijuana River dumps into Imperial Beach, it collects water from creeks and channels that run through heavily populated areas, up in the canyons of Tijuana. The city's population has more than doubled since the mid-90s, but its infrastructure has struggled to keep up. So people have been settling in neighborhoods without basic sewage systems, and using the river as a drain.
When it rains, we are at the bottom of a canyon, so water will rush down. It excavates really fast. So it's just an environmental disaster. Every time this happens, people down below receives all this trash and waste and renegade flows.
The people here know what's happening across the border because it affects them first.
¿Ustedes han escuchado de una ciudad allá en los Estados Unidos llamado Imperial Beach?
Se va la basura y el agua, las aguas negras.
¿Saben?
Sí. O sea, nosotros necesitamos drenaje, necesitamos servicios y no los tenemos. Esta agua no es de lluvia, porque ahorita no está lloviendo. Haz de cuenta que nada más improvisaron un canal que viene de otras colonias.
What everyone wants is simple: actual sewage infrastructure. But you can't erase decades of sprawl without spending billions of dollars. And Mexico isn't about to drop that kind of money because people in a small town across the border are pissed. So when officials from Imperial Beach and Tijuana meet, which they do a few times a month, they're stuck discussing patchwork solutions, like improvements to trash catchers and water treatment plants. If you go down to any of the places where water flows over to the US, you can see all the stuff that still isn't getting filtered out.
So once stuff goes through here, it's no longer in Mexico?
No. The problem that Imperial Beach and this section of Tijuana is that back in the 50s and 60s, we did not plan the city. We just let things happen, and now it's a huge problem.
You can't just stop water from flowing.
If we block the flow of water here, this road will eventually collapse, and all of this will end up at City Hall in Imperial Beach.
Since the water, and everything in it, crosses an international border, Imperial Beach's best bet is probably convincing the federal government to either fix the problem or force Mexico's hand. So they're suing the federal government for help, and hoping Trump will take on their border crisis too.
You had 30 seconds with the President of the United States. What would you tell him?
President Trump, please allow me to be of maximum service to you and allow you to be the champion of not only the American people, but also the Mexican people, and make a final solution to our environmental issues all along the border.
You still have like 10 seconds left. You don't want to add anything?
I might even say it something like, "Stop the poop!"